Good afternoon, everyone. Your Sunday weather briefing for this June 3rd finds that there are no major changes in my forecast versus what I presented on Friday. Clearly, a situation where rainfall in the Corn Belt is going to be dominated by ring of fire activity. Temperature and rainfall outlooks for this Sunday afternoon. Plenty of warmth in the forecast for the next 2 weeks for especially central and especially western portions of the Corn Belt through the Plain States, mostly above normal temperatures, but some pockets of much above normal readings at times. You can also see from my 6 to 10 and 11 to 15 day rainfall forecasts that have introduced some areas of above normal rainfall for both time frames. Again, those would be the favorite areas for ring of fire activity during both periods. QPF discussion for this Sunday afternoon. I really do not have any disagreements with what is shown here. This is a forecast that is based primarily on the latest output from the GFS model. Most of you realize that in general, I do not think that the GFS is a good model as compared to what the European model normally is, but I think that in this case that the Weather Prediction Center has some merit in going more towards the GFS operational and GFS ensemble with this weather forecast. Not saying that this forecast is perfect, and the fact that most of the rainfall that is shown is going to be occurring during the second half of this period means that this forecast is probably going to be changing a lot. But this is a ring of fire situation. I think that rainfall amounts, at least in some areas, can be every bit as big as shown in the Corn Belt as this map would suggest. As we get towards day 6 to 7, I think that this forecast is again heavily weighted towards the GFS operational, but even in this time frame, the European model is certainly not shy about breaking out range, and both models are in good agreement on exactly where the best range will be falling in that period. I want to spend a moment this afternoon talking about rainfall this weekend versus my own expectations. I did see rainfall across the bulk of the Corn Belt during this weekend. Obviously, some areas doing a lot better than others. I expected that the best rains this weekend would be in the western Corn Belt versus the east, and that was certainly the case. I expected to see mostly 4/10 of an inch to 1 inch rainfall amounts in the western Corn Belt. That was mostly the case as well, though we certainly did see some pockets of heavier rains in northern Missouri and a few areas in southeastern portions of Nebraska that had more than an inch. Certainly less rainfall in the eastern Corn Belt as well. As far as radar estimated rainfall for the 48-hour period through early Sunday, you can see that as expected, the best rains were in eastern portion of Nebraska through western and southwestern Iowa, with more limited rainfall amounts further east than there. My contention with the QPF map on Friday morning was the fact that it was blanketing most of Illinois with more than a half inch of rainfall, and I expected on Friday morning that there would be portions of Illinois that actually saw no rain at all, and clearly a situation where my forecast was more correct, as the bulk of Illinois did indeed see less than a half inch of rainfall during the first half of the weekend period, and you can of course see that there were large portions of Illinois that did indeed see no rainfall at all through this Sunday morning. As far as rainfall is concerned for the upcoming time frame, looking at total rainfall through 7 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon shows that a big portion of the Corn Belt is not going to be seeing much at all in that time frame. However, it will be for especially tomorrow night through Tuesday night, in which we will start to see ring of fire activity start to develop in portions of the Corn Belt. It'll be pretty insignificant, though. I think that anything that is falls for tomorrow night and into early Tuesday would be in northeastern portions of the Corn Belt. Locally heavy, but I think that a lot of it is not going to be all that big. Then for Tuesday night and into a portion of Wednesday, the bulk of the ring of fire activity will be in far northwestern portions of the Corn Belt. Again, there too could be locally significant, but again, the ring of fire activity that we see for tomorrow night and again for Tuesday night is going to be confined to just small portions of the Corn Belt, leaving a big portion of the Corn Belt probably seeing nothing through the afternoon hours on Wednesday. It is after that, though, that things will really start to cook with regards to ring of fire activity. Looking at surface features as of 7 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, there's the European model showing some activity. There's the GFS operational, European ensemble, Canadian operational model. For 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday, European model, GFS operational, European ensemble, Canadian model. 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, European model getting a little bit more enthused about activity. GFS model, Canadian, European model. We'll skip a day and we'll go to 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday, June 11th. northwest to southeast oriented area of rainfall from both the European and GFS models. Note the plunge of cool air into northeastern portions of the nation at that time. Big heat at that time in the southern plains, so a battle zone in between those two air masses would indicate more ring of fire activity at that time. So the bottom line is that this is a ring of fire activity clearly coming up for the Corn Belt. It'll be getting started in some areas for tomorrow night, but the bulk of the activity really getting going as we get towards Wednesday night, and it could very well be a situation that starting Wednesday night and continuing through the rest of the 10-day forecast, if not even longer than that, a daily threat of ring of fire activity somewhere in the Corn Belt during that time frame. And when you have a situation like that, it is a situation where eventually a big portion of the Corn Belt region, probably favoring the northeastern half versus the southwestern half, but a big portion of the Corn Belt is going to be seeing significant, if not heavy amounts of rainfall during the next 10 days, or possibly even longer than that. It could last right into the 11 to 15 day time frame. The written report this afternoon, I put several discussions from various Weather Service offices and various Weather Service agencies, but I thought that this one from the National Weather Service Moline best agree with what I think the weather pattern is going to be like coming up. Note that they see a stalled front with very favorable conditions for mesoscale convective systems or big thunderstorm complexes and heavy rainfall in at least the region for several days, nearly every day in the period in question. So again, most of the National Weather Service offices and other Weather Service agencies are fully on board with my own forecast calling for significant and many chances of rainfall starting the middle of this week and into next week. But I thought that this discussion from the National Weather Service Moline best illustrated my own thoughts as far as the upcoming weather pattern is concerned. With regards to temperatures, again, it will be central and especially western portions of the Corn Belt and the Plain States to see the bulk of the above or isolated much above normal temperatures for the next 10 days to as much as 2 weeks. Looking at high temperatures for Tuesday, you can see that at that time, pockets in the western and southwestern Corn Belt getting to above 90 degrees at that time. By the time we get to Friday there, you can see our temperature contrast setting up that would really enhance the ring of fire activity. Note the extensive area of 90 to 95 plus degree heat in the southern and southwestern Corn Belt, some 100 plus degree heat across portions of the southern plains. Butting up against that, high temperatures just in the 70s on Friday for the northeastern Corn Belt. And again, it would be the battle zone in between those two air masses, ring of fire activity that would be enhancing the rainfall amounts and rainfall chances in the heart of the Corn Belt for that day. Back on Friday, I talked about a potential modest change in the weather pattern as we got towards the latter portion of the 11 to 15 day period. What I'm showing here is the 500 millibar forecast for June 15th from the Friday edition of the European Ensemble on the left and from this afternoon's edition of the European Ensemble for that same day. You can see that back on Friday we had some semblance of a trough of low pressure in western portions of the nation with the ridge of high pressure being shoved east. Notice how the forecast has changed since that time. Instead of a trough, we have a big ridge of high pressure above normal height anomalies in northwestern portions at that same time, with the ridge of high pressure still mainly towards western portions of the nation and still semblance of a trough in the east. So this potential weather pattern change that I noticed in the later portion of the 11 to 15 day period on the weather maps back on Friday looks like it's not going to be verifying. Looks like overall the ridge through the end of the 2 week time frame mainly going to be in western portions of the nation, and in fact the ridge may be shoved far enough west on today's weather maps we may actually be seeing some moderation in temperatures even in the western Corn Belt and northern plains by the time we get to the end of the 11 to 15 day period. Internationally for this Sunday afternoon in Brazil, the dry season obviously fully taking control in northern Brazil. Rain's going to be seen more in southern Safrina corn areas for the next 2 weeks. Over in Europe, still a wet situation for southern and especially southwestern Europe for the next 2 weeks, with France seeing some very good rains. I think that the forecast this afternoon has to be considered as a little bit drier versus Friday's outlook for the winter grain and summer row crop areas of the former Soviet Union. It's not going to be completely dry, but you can see that below normal rainfall there for the next 2 weeks. I would think that for week 1 and week 2 each of those time frames featuring rains of no better than a quarter to 3/4 of an inch in the winter grain and summer row crop areas of the former Soviet Union. In the spring grain areas of Russia and the former Soviet Union, note the big rainfall amounts that are going to be seen across a big portion of that area for the next 10 days. We are going to be seeing some big warming taking place in the near term across the spring grain areas. Easily their warmest weather that they have seen probably so far this year, but that's going to be short-lived. Note the big intrusion of cool air back into the forecast for that area by the time we get to Friday, and cold air is going to be then dominating that area once again for Friday through at least the end of the 10-day forecast period. Welcome rains in the forecast for the next 10 days in Manchurian corn and soybean areas. You can see there that from the European ensemble, a lot of that area is seeing 10-day rainfall totals of more than an inch, some places getting upwards of 2 inches. Again, that rainfall would be very welcome. For the Canadian prairies, some very nice rains so far this weekend in wheat areas of eastern Saskatchewan and into Manitoba. You can see that for the rest of this week, though, pretty limited rains across the Canadian prairies. They will also be warming up. You can see that temperatures by the time we get to Saturday running well above normal once again across the Canadian prairies. In Australia, near to below normal rainfall across wheat areas of Australia for the next 2 weeks. Best rains in the wheat areas of Western Australia as you get further towards the coastline. In the eastern growing areas, rainfall looks pretty minimal for the next 10 days. Most of it for around Friday should be under a half inch there. The best rainfall in eastern Australian wheat areas probably coming during the 11 to 15 day time frame, and given that far out into the forecast period, obviously some thoughts that that rainfall would not even verify given how far out it is in the forecast period. Want to start taking a look at India as the monsoon has started in India. You can see that for the 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 day time frames that rainfall should be running above normal. So an active Indian monsoon for the next 10 days, but things really winding down though again as we get towards the 11 to 15 day period. That's what I have for you Sunday afternoon. We'll talk to everyone again tomorrow morning.